War is hell. This is a phrase we have heard often, and yet, once upon a time, it wasn't the hell we know now. Of course, people died, were tortured, a lot of bad stuff did happen, and yet, to the people of the time, war was an adventure. Second sons with no inheritance to wait for were often excited at the prospect of going to war. After all, especially after the beginning of the colonial age, being a soldier meant a steady pay, a respectable social position, a purpose in life, the possibility of a good retirement. War truly became hell in the trenches of the First World War. And there are a lot of reasons why it did. But today we're going to focus on one. Not something that was added to war, like a new technology, weapon, or strategy, but something that was removed. After all, World War I was the war without cavalry. A couple of days ago, I was listening to a song by Corb Lund, Horse Soldier, Horse Soldier. It is about the story of the cavalry itself. It is a very good song. I'll leave a link in the description below. Anyway, the point is that when the song is about to finish, it tells the story of how cavalry's days were numbered when the trenches dominated warfare. And that led me to think of the effects of this absence. So let's get into it. At the start of the First World War, every major power still believed in the decisive power of cavalry. The armies of 1914 marched with the lancers and sabers gleaming. Heirs to century of warfare where the charge of the mounted man could decide the fate of empires. Cavalry had always been the force of decision, the arm that turned retreat into rout, pursuit into massacre. At Waterloo, Eylau, even in ancient times at Cannae and Gaugamela, the moment infantry broke, cavalry poured through the gap to ensure no recovery was possible. But in 1914, this tradition collided head-on with modern firepower. When the war began with Germany's invasion of Belgium and France, cavalry patrols were still expected to perform reconnaissance and exploit enemy gaps. But even in those early battles of August, Mons, the Marne, and the so-called Great Retreat, cavalry found itself reduced to a ghost of its old role. Why? Because they were facing rapid-firing artillery, magazine rifles, machine guns. The killing power of infantry, even retreating infantry, had been multiplied, and with the battlefield expanding and expanding, they were facing territories in France and Belgium that were thick with hedges, fences, telegraph wires, and villages. Every road and railway was crowded with columns of men, guns and supply wagons, leaving no open field to charge across. When British or French cavalry did attempt charges, they rode straight into concentrated rifle fire from infantry who could now lay down hundreds of rounds a minute from entrenched cover. The psychological balance of power had shifted. In previous wars, cavalry terrified retreating infantry because those men had no means to fight back effectively once broken. But by 1914, even a few dozen men with bolt-action rifles could form a lethal skirmish line, cutting down horses long before riders came close. Cavalry could no longer pursue because no retreat was total. The enemy could always reorganize behind a wall of lead. The direct consequence of this was that now marching men were pursuing marching men, moving at the same speed. Even if you pushed your men like the Germans did, bringing them to complete exhaustion before they reached Paris, a sweeping victory, like people were used to, was impossible. This allowed the front to finally crystallize, because no victory could be complete, no rout disastrous. With the freezing of the front and the creation of the first actual trenches, cavalry became completely obsolete. The horse, once a symbol of mobility, was now a burden in a world of mud, wire, and artillery shells. Cavalry couldn't charge through barbed wire. It couldn't survive in the beaten zones swept by machine gun fire. The very environment, the churned earth, the craters, the gas, the constant bombardment, annihilated the possibility of shock tactics. Horses were instead relegated to supply work, hauling guns and wagons to the front at night, invisible and expendable. And without cavalry, the logic of war changed completely. Battles could be won tactically, positions were taken, trenches were captured, but there was no longer any means to exploit victory. When one side broke through, it couldn't chase the enemy into the open and destroy him. The defeated could retreat a few kilometers, dig in again, and reset the slaughter. That was the true horror of modern war. Not just the killing, but the impossibility of ending it. Cavalry had once been the sword that concluded battles, and when it disappeared, it left only attrition. Soldiers were used to horror. Older wars were full of it. Romans ended themselves in the middle of the formation when, at Cannae, they knew they were gonna have to wait for an entire day for the Carthaginians to reach them and finish the work by hand. But it was one day. The battle was completely won or lost. True horror, true hell, isn't in the devastation happening in front of you. It is in the time passing as all of that horror proves completely useless. In a world without cavalry, time became abundant, and time allows a modern state organized to create incredible amount of stuff. Weaponry, soldiers, everything you need to continue the slaughter, to bring it to bear. The knight, the rider, the dragoon. We often feel nostalgia looking at them. They represent something. Honor, maybe. Dignity, maybe. Or a kind of limited warfare that we kinda long for. A chess match between nations that starts and finishes. A time before war became hell on earth.